So one of the most intimidating parts of the job hunt process for aspiring data analysts is the live coding interview. This is a topic that I get a lot of questions from students on, especially if you've never done a live coding interview before. There are also so many platforms out there today that can be pretty overwhelming to know where to even start or how to even practice. So in today's video, I am going to be ranking the popular technical interview prep platforms so that you know exactly what to look for and exactly which platforms to not use. For each of these platforms, I am also going to solve a question live for you so you know what it looks like to pass a technical interview. And then at the end, I just want to mention one platform that you definitely should not use and why. If you're new here, I'm Christine. I am a former data hiring manager and also a data mentor who has helped almost 100 students along in their data journeys. And in this channel, we talk about the strategies and the frameworks that can accelerate your path to becoming a data analyst. Now, before we dive in, I just want to mention that a lot of times when people think technical interviews, they're thinking just about the code, not realizing that as hiring managers, we're also looking for how you actually communicate your thought process. So that is what I'm really going to demo today. For each of the platforms, I'm going to rank them on 3 main dimensions. The first one being the UI, the interface. Is it easy to use? The second one is the representativeness of the actual questions. So do the questions represent the kinds of questions that you will get in a live technical interview? And then the third one is the actual quality of the answers. Are the solutions well explained? Do they use industry best practices? And are they good enough for you to also use these solutions to learn how to write SQL? We're going to rate each of these platforms out of 5 stars and then see which one is the winner. Let's dive in. Okay, so the first platform that we're going to look at together is DataLemur. When I go to the page right away, I see that it takes me to Ace the SQL and Data Science interview. This is a very popular one that many of you guys have probably heard of. And I can see that it takes me to a page where I can see questions by company, title, and difficulty. I have easy, medium, and hard questions, and then a bunch of stuff at the bottom. I like so far that the UI is very clean. I can obviously just dive right into the questions without having to meander and poke through a lot of different pages. If I go to the practice interview questions page, then I can see that I not only have SQL questions, but I also have questions in stats, machine learning, probability, and Python. Now we're gonna focus on SQL questions today. I would say about 3/4 of my students who go through the live technical interview get tested in SQL rather than Python. This is most commonly the case for data analysts with less than 3 years of experience. When you start interviewing for roles looking for more than 3 years of experience, that's where you are more likely to get tested in Python. So let's focus on SQL today. Then I can see there's a Learn SQL page where you can also get into some basics of SQL. So this is a pretty nice place to start if you're just looking to warm up for SQL and then dive right into some questions. And let's do that. Let's actually take a look at some of the questions and see how representative they are. So I'm going to go to the Facebook question, page with no likes. So what I'll do here is first talk through whether or not this page represents the kind of things that you might see in a live technical interview. Then I will ask the question as the interviewer, and then I will answer the question as the interviewee. So page with no likes, Facebook SQL interview question. Assume you're given 2 tables containing data about Facebook pages and their respective likes. Write a query to return the ID of Facebook pages that have 0 likes. So for this first question, which is supposedly based off of a Facebook or Meta SQL interview question, I will say I have interviewed at Facebook, Google, Twitter, and Vimeo and Google. And so when I comment on the representation of these questions, I will also be using that experience to share whether or not this is, similar to what I've seen in those interviews. Okay, so according to this page, we will see a pages table and a pages likes table, and then it also gives us an example of the actual input. Now, sometimes when you get technical interviews, you won't actually see the input of the table. You would only see the schema here. So for example, you would only see these column names and the data types, and also these column names and the data types. So just note that sometimes you might have to imagine the way that that table looks based on what the schema shows you. Now I'm going to pretend to be the interviewer. I'm going to ask the question as the interviewer. So Christine, we have 2 tables here. We have the pages table and also the pages likes table. The pages table has a page ID and the name of the page. And then the pages likes table has a user ID, a page ID, and a liked date. So if that page had a like, then it will show up in this table. I want you to write a query that returns the pages that have no likes and also sort it in ascending order based on the page ID. Now I am switching to interviewee, Christine. And this is how I would go about sharing my thought process and answering the question. Okay, great. So from what I understand, these 2 tables, it links between the 2 of them based on the page ID because it seems to be like that's the only column. That's the only common column. I just have a question here about the pages likes table. Can I assume that if a page doesn't have any likes, it just doesn't show up in the table at all? Or would it show up in the table and it just has some kind of null value in the like date as a placeholder or something like that? Then the interviewer would say, yeah, you can assume that if it doesn't have any likes, then it's just not in the page likes table at all. Okay, great. So in that case, I'm just going to talk my thinking out loud here, and then I'll start the code. So first, I'm going to join these two tables based on the page ID. I would start with the pages table and then left join the pages likes onto that, because I just want to bring in any likes that exist for the root table, which is the pages table. Just thinking out loud here, I would use that having statement grouped by the page ID, and then I would filter to where the having statement is equal to 0. And then lastly, I would sort by the page ID. That's my thoughts so far. Is there anything that I missed in terms of logic that you think we should go through before I dive into the code? Okay, pause. And then the interviewer would say, no, that sounds good to me. Let's go ahead and start coding. All right, so first I'm gonna just start from the pages table and then left join the page likes table. And I'm going to use the shorthand using the using to join them, but just let me know if you want me to be more explicit and use an actual join. And then from here, return the IDs of Facebook pages that have 0 likes. Okay, so I know that I need to group by the page ID, and then I am going to have to count the number of likes per page ID. So I'm going to say pages.page ID, and then let's say count liked date. Yeah, I was gonna do distinct like date, but I'm actually not, because it doesn't matter if the like dates are different or not. I just want to count the number of times it's been liked. A question I should have asked earlier is, can I assume that there are no duplicates in the page likes table? So every time a table is liked, it's not like it's inserted into this table more than one time. Is that correct? And then the interviewer would confirm and say, yeah, that's correct. Okay, so then in that case, I can just group by the page ID, count the like date, and then I'm going to group by 1 here. So I want to say for every page ID, count the number of likes, and I will say count like date as likes. In a technical interview, you should assume that you cannot run the code, because you won't always be coding in a platform where you can actually access the database and run it. So we're not going to be able to run it and check out our answer as we're working through it. Okay, so looking at this, I'm going to have for every page table, every page, the number of likes. And as I said before, I'm going to use the having statement, and I'm going to filter that to where the count of likes is equal to 0. So I'll say having, and then I'll just copy this here. Is equal to 0. So I just want to confirm here, do we just want the page IDs as the output, or do we want to have any other columns? And the interviewer would say, we just want to have the page IDs. So in this case, I'm actually going to remove that calculation, and I'm just going to return the page ID. Okay, so if I just review my answer with you here really quick, what I did is I joined the two tables using page ID, and then I used a having statement grouping by the page ID, and then counted the number of likes, and then we said sort by ascending order, so I'll just say order by 1. So the output should be just one column with the page ID column that shows the pages that don't have any likes. And I think that that is going to be my final code, if there are any questions. And then it says that it was accepted based on the output, so the output matches. Now I will say that I saw this question in kind of a strange way, because I used the having statement, because that's what I could think of in the moment. So I am curious to pop over to the solutions and just see what they say. Okay, so DataLemur here is actually using the except statement to find the page IDs that exist, find the page IDs that have likes, and then find where they're not matching. I would say this is not really a common practice, and so if I was interviewing someone, I would be looking for an answer that is a little bit more commonplace or uses more of an industry best practices, like using joins in this. So let's see, method 2, using left outer join, perform between pages. Okay, so they used left join and then said where the page ID is equal to null. That answer is better than my answer. So what they did here was did the join and then just said, if you don't exist in the page likes table, then that means that you don't have any likes. And then method number 3 and method number 4. So there's a bunch of different ways of solving this question, obviously, but then the answer still worked for the way that I solved it. So overall, I would say that these solutions are pretty good, but they don't always show what I would expect to be the most commonplace answer first, which would have been the left join answer. These kinds of questions, the way these questions are presented to you, the way they show you the schema, the way you're calculating real business metrics, and it's positioned as if you were at a company, this is a really good example of the level of the kinds of questions that you might get asked in a technical interview. These questions are slightly on the harder end because they do not ask in a way that is very direct. For example, they do not say, return these 3 columns, sort by this, group by this, right? You'll see that other platforms kind of give you more direct instructions on how to answer the questions. So while that was an easy question, I would say it's actually not that easy. It represents some of the more typical questions that you'll get asked. Okay, so to summarize on DataLemur, given the ease of use of the UI, the robustness of the actual solutions, and the kinds of questions that you get asked and how well they represent the real deal, I would give DataLemur a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Okay, enough about DataLemur. Let us pop over to LeetCode. Now let's look at this UI. If I go to LeetCode.com, then right away I see a lot of things on the homepage. It's a bit messy. There's just a lot of different things going on. Some of it is for programming, some of it is for a crash course, some of it is for interviews, some of it is for learning. Let's just focus on the interview section. So I'm going to go to the problem section. This page also has a lot going on. Honestly, I would say if you are prepping for a technical interview, don't get distracted by all this other stuff. Just focus on finding a really strong list of questions to use. You've got this section here where you have a study plan, a calendar, trending companies, and then also a whole list of questions, many of them which are actually locked behind a paywall. Okay, so then on the problems page, I'm gonna pop over to the SQL 50 list, which some of them are available, some of them are not available for free. So that's another thing to note. DataLemur, most of the questions are for free, and so that's another plus there. Now, when I am here, the UI is much cleaner than before, and I like that it's also organized by the actual practice that you're gonna do. So for example, basic joins, basic aggregate functions, advanced select and joins. So it's a little bit more direct than DataLemur in terms of saying this is what we are going to practice in these kinds of questions. But I'm more interested in the quality of the question. So let's go over to this first question, big countries. I'm going to read through the question as the interviewer and then give some commentary before we do the actual question. All right, so we have our first question is going to be for this table where we have the name of the country, the continent it belongs to, the area, population, and GDP. And for this question, I would like for you to just return every big country, which is defined as a place that has an area of at least 3 million kilometers squared, or a population of at least 25 million people. And you can return the result in any order. And then each row in the table gives information about the name of the country, and it is distinct on the actual country. So really quick on this note, these kinds of questions where they tell you exactly the columns to return, they tell you basically exactly the filters, and the question itself does not really seem that business oriented. It's not really like a business metric, and you're also not really, the question itself isn't positioned as being in the context of any kind of company. These questions are not as representative of what you should be practicing for a live technical interview. It leans a bit more on the easier side because they're basically telling you exactly what to query, and you're not really exercising your thinking as an analyst in translating the question, which is more business oriented, into SQL. Anyways, I'm going to switch to the interviewee now and go ahead and talk through my thought process. So it sounds like we want to return 3 columns: the name, the population, and the area. And I'm just going to use a where statement here to filter down to where the area is at least 3 million, and then also where the population is at least 25 million. You said we can return it in any order, so I'm not going to order it by anything, or I could just order it by alphabetical order of name just to be organized. I think that's where I'm going to start. We won't have any joins or anything. Is there anything that I'm missing in terms of the logic before I dive into the code? And then the interviewer will say, no, it looks like you got everything, so let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and code this now, and then I will explain my solution. This is what I would say is the rest of my query. Are there any questions? And then the interviewer would say, no, looks good. Let's move on to the next question. And it looks like it was accepted. The answer is correct. We could submit it if we wanted to. So right away, I can see that there's a few different ways to solve it. They're showing you also how to solve it in Python. And then down here, if you look at database, I don't know why they call it database instead of SQL, you can see how you would also solve it in SQL. So it's a little bit messy just in terms of the formatting and the aesthetic. It's a little bit harder to see all the things that are going on compared to DataLemur. So it gets a few points off for that. And then you also have the solutions tab where everyone else contributes their solutions. Personally, I think that can be a bit of a distraction because you kind of just want to know what the right answer is. You don't necessarily want to see all the different ways that so many people have solved it, because those are just like syntactical differences. The thing is, these questions, like I said, the main reason why LeetCode gets some points off here is because you're not going to get asked questions in technical interviews that are this straightforward. They don't represent questions that have business metrics or company context in them. Use LeetCode as a practice to ramp up to DataLemur questions. So overall, based on the UI, the quality of the questions, the quality of the solutions, I would give LeetCode a 3.5 out of 5 stars. We are going to move on to AnalystBuilder, which is built by the one and only Alex the Analyst, who I would say is like the OG of data analytics on YouTube. It's kind of similar to DataLemur. Well, it would just have a lot of different questions and then rank it by difficulty and not really order it by the category of the kind of, SQL functions or Python functions that you want to practice. This UI is also really nice. It's really clean. I like that you can just dive right into the questions. And there are other fancy things like a leaderboard and your progress tracking, which is great for your own motivation, but it's not like LeetCode in that it doesn't get super cluttered and, bombard you with a bunch of other things. Quick note here, obviously, like I said before, DataLemur is the one that I would say is the most free. AnalystBuilder also does have questions that are free, but also a lot of them do have a paywall behind them. So UI and interface looks really nice. And then let's pop over to an actual question and look at how those questions are. All right, so I am going to read through the question and then give my commentary, and then we'll dive into the interview between me and myself. All right, Sarah's bike shop sells a lot of bikes and wants to know what the average sale price is of her bikes. She sometimes gives away a bike for free for a charity. And if she does, she leaves the price of the bike as blank, but marks it sold. Write a query to show her average sale price of bikes for only bikes that were sold and not donated. Okay. And then you have bike ID, bike price, and then bike sold. So as I mentioned, there are sometimes when you'll get a live technical interview and you won't see the actual data set. So this is an example of it. We have to imagine what this table looks like. I kind of like that because I think that it's a little bit more representative of some of the more tricky technical interviews you'll have where you won't see the table in front of you. But there is a preview function that if you want to look at it, you can look at it here. What I recommend is try to solve it without actually seeing the data set first, because that will stretch your imagination and your thinking as an analyst when you go into these SQL questions. So the preview, this is where we can see what the table is. Popping over to interviewer, I would say, okay, we have this table of bike IDs, bike prices, bike sold. The bike sold will have a Y in it if it has been sold. And so I want to have a query that shows the average sale price of bikes that were sold and not donated, and then just round your answer to 2 decimal points. And then now switching to interviewee, this is how I would respond. Okay, great. So the first things I want to do is we're going to have to filter down to where bike sold is equal to Y, because we only want bikes that were actually sold and not donated. And then I need to group by bike ID and then average the bike price. And then I can just round that average to 2 decimal points. You didn't really mention if there's any column that you want me to sort by. Does it matter how I actually sort the results or no? And the interviewer could say, no, it doesn't matter. So just leave it as is. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and start coding this. Select everything from inventory where bikes sold equals Y. Okay, so I am pretending to still be the interviewee here, and I just realized that in my explanation originally I made a mistake. I had said that I wanted to calculate the average sale price of bikes, and so I was going to group it by the bike ID. In this case, reading the question over, I actually don't think we need to group by. We're just going to take the average and then round it across the board. So that's actually what I would say as the interviewee when I noticed that I made a mistake. I would just communicate my thought process and then correct myself. And it doesn't really count for a lot of points off if you realize that as you actually start coding and you talk it through, because it's very common that on the job you would do the same thing where you would adjust your query as you're going. So in this case, I'm actually going to adjust what I said before and not do bike ID. I'm just going to take the average of the bike price and then round that. Yay, we got confetti, so I think that means that the answer is correct. So just note that AnalystBuilder, these kinds of questions, this is supposedly a moderate question, right? But this moderate question is easier than the easy question on DataLemur. So I would say that AnalystBuilder does a good job at giving you a little bit of business context. Like, it's nice that it's positioned as if you were working at a company and this is the company's data set. But in terms of the rigor of the actual questions, the questions they lean a little bit more towards the easy side. And I say that because this is a moderate question, but we're not even using joins. We're not even using that many aggregate functions. We're not even using group bys. And those functions, I would say, are required for what I would classify as a moderate question. This is the part where I think AnalystBuilder beats all the other platforms. We have the answers in all the different kinds of languages that you might get tested in. And then you also have a video explanation from Alex himself. And that I often find is much more helpful than just reading the actual notes of how someone solved the question. So AnalystBuilder, I think I like the best in terms of the quality of the solution and how helpful it can be for your own learning. So overall, for the UI, the representation of the actual questions, and then the actual solutions, I would give Analyst a 4.2 out of 5 stars. Okay, I want to really quickly just talk to you guys about a platform that I would not use if you are applying to data analyst jobs. So that is HackerRank. I'm gonna just pop into some of these questions and explain why they are not that representative of the kinds of questions that you will get asked. So weather observation station 6, the question is query the list of city names starting with vowels from station, and your result cannot contain duplicates. Here is the schema. Let's pop over to some other questions and just see what the other ones say. This one is called the pads. Let's see what that is. Query an alphabetically ordered list of all names and occupations, immediately followed by the first letter of each profession as a parenthetical. Query the number of occurrences in each occupation, sort the occurrences in ascending order, and output them in the following format. There are a total of blank occupation count occupations. Okay, these are not the kinds of questions that you're going to get tested on. Usually you want to look for questions that have some kind of business metric or calculation in it, rather than things like string manipulation. So if I put these two questions side by side, here's a DataLemur question, and then here's a HackerRank question, you want to look for the DataLemur-like questions. Now, obviously, all of these opinions are just my own, so I would be curious to hear what you guys thought of these platforms as well. Leave me a comment below, and when I get to 15K subscribers, hopefully soon, I'm going to be doing an open live Q&A session answering any questions you guys have about working in data and about the job hunt. So make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video.